Hi, I'm J. Rachel Addison.
And I'm Miles Stokes.
And we're the hosts of Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, a weekly podcast all about the ins, the outs, and the retcons of comics' greatest superhero soap opera.
We're also the hosts of Jay and Miles Review the X-Men,
which you're watching right now,
where we talk about the X-books that come out each week.
This week we're looking at the books of September 21st, 2016, and we are back in my office this week.
For old time's sake.
For old time's sake, and because it's a 5-book week, and making Katie stay after hours for that long when she's tired and sick, and we're running late seemed kind of awful, and, you know, old time's sake.
Indeed, and yeah, 5-book week. I mean, as much as the X-line has certainly decreased over the last year or so, you know, this is the sort of thing we used to do. I think we did 9 books at one point.
I think so. It was either 8 or 9.
Yeah.
Our longest week. So I guess we should probably jump in since we've got a long way to go.
First up is Deadpool V Gambit number 5 of 5, written by Ben Acker and Ben Blacker, with art by Danilo Beyruth and colors by Chris Peter. So the series is over. This is our last issue, and it has been a glorious ride. I know we weren't quite sure about the series when it first launched, but it grew on us almost immediately, and at this point, I can heartily recommend it.
Like flowers, or a vine, or a mushroom, or bigotry, or a banana.
Yes.
Tim Minchin forever. No, this is a lovely series, and I would say that I'm sad it's ending, but honestly, it nails the landing so well that I'm kind of glad. Like, this is a really good ending to a really good book that we really enjoyed, and we heartily recommend, despite the fact that Deadpool's in the title.
So it's been a heist book, and it's gotten a little less and more heisty as it's gone. I mean, one of the hallmarks of a good heist story is that things go wrong, and boy, have things gone not just wrong, but weird by this point.
As one would hope, given the title lineup, but the number of intersecting heists has increased across the series, as again one would hope with this particular lineup, both creatively and character-wise.
And now we have a bunch of Norse gods, because it turns out Loki's behind a bunch of it, as we've been finding out in recent issues. And so it's the Warriors 3, they're here. Like, is it Christmas? And then later on, Fat Cobra fights Volstagg again. Is it Christmas, or whatever the Norse equivalent is? I guess probably Christmas has a lot to do with Norse, like, winter festival stuff. But regardless, but it's great. I mean, once again, we have Deadpool as our extremely unreliable narrator-ish character. And I mean, it's right there at the beginning as he tells us what Yggdrasil, the world tree, is like, what the 9 realms are like, and just makes a bunch of stuff up and gets most of it wrong and doesn't care.
Man, our panel of the week is from a different title, but pretty much every runner-up and honorable mention comes from this one.
It does, yeah. And I also really love the idea of Deadpool as Dead Fist. Like, he's been given the powers of Kunlun by Fat Cobra, and his mystical nonsense is, well, it's nonsense. He just keeps talking about chi and stuff, has no idea what he's talking about, but is convinced he's 100% profound, which is great. And Gambit is possibly the sleaziest we've seen him yet in this one.
Well, more in tone than in action.
Yeah, but like when he comes back and is bemoaning his fate as the shadows fall upon him and talks about how he hasn't been able to kiss anyone in weeks. He feels like Rogue, and it's so rough. As everyone else has like way worse problems. It's pretty great.
Yeah, man, this book manages to take 2 characters who are often, not always, really annoying. I'll say who are 2 characters who are written inconsistently and who are written in forms that often lead them really annoying, because they're both characters who can be absolutely awesome. And uses the things that tend to make them most off-putting when they're played straight as just phenomenally good comedy.
Agreed,
like,
yeah.
they nail what makes the caricature versions of these guys tick, and to tell a pretty compelling story. Oh, and Scrambler comes back.
Scrambler comes back, and the way his story wraps up is satisfying. And, like, the ending of this was good. It was what I was hoping for in the ending, both in terms of the events that happened and in terms of it just wrapping up the book very well. So,
yeah,
yes.
I'm not going to spoil what happens to Deadpool or Gambit. Screw those guys, but Scrambler at least gets to live happily ever after.
Yeah.
That's important. That's the important thing.
So yeah, this book, it's really fun. Whether you pick it up digitally or in issues or in trade or whatever, it's worthwhile. Even if you're not huge fans of, say, one of the characters in the title, hypothetically.
We like him. He's just not an X-Man.
Yes. It's worth your time. It's one of the best comedy books I've read in a while. Honestly, the best since Worst X-Men Ever, I would say.
Yeah, it's up there. And I think, honestly, that they'll have pretty overlapping fan bases. This one is a lot snappier. It's a lot more dialogue driven. It's a lot more character driven, since the main characters are not newcomers to the Marvel universe.
You can definitely tell that Ben Acker and Ben Blacker write for radio. Well, podcasting technically, but effectively radio. Like, the pacing on the dialogue is exactly that, and it's lovely. So yeah, good stuff. High marks. Check it out.
Next up, we've got our second annual of this year, following last month's all-new Wolverine. This is the Extraordinary X-Men Annual #1. It's got 2 stories: Prison Break, written by Ollie Masters, penciled by Carlo Barberi, inked by Walden Wong, and colored by Israel Silva with Rochelle Rosenberg. And Forge, We Have a Problem, written by Brandon Montclair, with art by Rossi Campa, I think. Colors by Ian Herring. Man. I really like this annual. Mm-hmm. I have been hard on Extraordinary X-Men, I think justifiably. This annual drives home what I want it to be.
Because we have such a great collection of characters, and honestly, a weird but potentially very solid premise. And yeah, when you go in the right directions with it, it soars.
Yeah, it's nice seeing the X-Men doing what they do best, which is acting in the interest of mutants, even if that goes against the establishment. Mm-hmm. Storm trying to negotiate with leaders while organizing a team to basically do a jailbreak behind their backs. 2 mutant criminals are at risk. There's a Terrigen cloud coming.
They're from the Nasty Boys.
Do you remember the
Nasty Boys?
Oh, I always remember the Nasty Boys. And the fact that these dudes are from the Nasty Boys made me love this story that much more, because the Nasty Boys will always have a special place in my heart. A special and very glam place in my heart. It always
seems so weird to me that in the X-Men cartoon, like right at the beginning of season 2 when Sinister shows up, like they chose the Nasty Boys of all characters to be his henchmen. I mean, they could have had the Marauders, but no, it was the Nasty Boys. Yes. Including that one guy whose power is that he's got a lot of fur.
Yep. He stays warm in winter easily.
There was also Gorgeous George, though, and I will forever love him for his name, because it's fun to say.
I mean, that is a dude who knows what his thing is.
Right. He's like Perfect Tommy from Buckaroo Banzai.
He is, yeah. Yeah, a little bit, in some ways. But anyway, it's a fun heist. It's a fun jailbreak story. It features a smaller chunk of the team than we've generally seen, which is nice to see, and out of their usual element, at least as far as this series, also cool. The story that I want to focus on, though, is the second one. This is Forge, We Have a Problem, written by Brandon Montclair, with art by Rossi Campa, and colors by Ian Herring, and it guest stars Moon Girl, of the eponymous Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Moon Girl is great, and I love Moon Girl dearly, and she is super important to me for a lot of reasons, and I think we actually talked about the first issue of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur in the reviews. I'll link back to that in the copy below this. Mm-hmm. But This is her and Forge teaming up, and Forge is, of course, the great gadgeteer, but this story also has something that is the single most direct route to a high score from me, which is little girls building makeshift rocket ships. Like, I mean, look, this is no secret. My Womanthology space story was that. Mm-hmm. And that it's Moon Girl here is doubly splendid, and also her rapport with Forge, who's a character who we haven't seen a ton of in this run, and who I always want to see more of.
I think that was my favorite thing about this story, is that Forge and Moon Girl respect each other. They're both stubborn as hell. They both very much have their own ways of doing things. You know, Forge certainly is. I wouldn't call him traditional, but he's more traditional than Lunella. But I like the fact that he recognizes, okay, this girl's incredibly smart, and she recognizes, okay, this guy's incredibly experienced, and they're able to operate as peers despite being different in almost every possible way. Like, that type of connection, for me, that's one of the things that makes X-Men X-Men. And seeing that between a mutant and an inhuman in this weird environment in which we're in these days, I really dug that.
I'm also a really big fan of shorter stories and one-shots that focus on one character, especially one underserved character. I've been reading back through a lot of classic X-Men recently, and reading and enjoying those backup stories, largely for that particular feature. And yeah, it's nice to see it here, especially with those two. The art is lovely. It's a little bit away from what we've been seeing on the main Moon Girl series, and it's awesome. It fits the story beautifully. It fits the characters beautifully, and it's the mood of it is really, really lovely. This is a weirdly nerdy thing, but coloring like twilight in cities, that time of day, is something that's really hard to nail, and just sort of that sense of almostness in terms of lighting. And Herring just does a gorgeous job on it, which contributes again to the atmosphere of an already really lovely story.
Next, we have Uncanny X-Men number 13, written by Cullen Bunn, with pencils by Greg Land, inks by Jay Leiston, and colors by David Curiel. So, yeah, we continue our storyline of the X-Types allied with the Hellfire Club and going after the Someday Corporation, who we actually saw their work, at least, back in the first issue of this series. They're a company that provides mutants with a way to cryogenically sleep through the Terrigen Cloud crisis in exchange for, money.
Spoiler. It's a trap.
Yeah, and I actually really like this as a premise.
Yeah.
Because you see this in real life all the time. Whenever you have a crisis, whenever you have, a major health problem, a catastrophe, a disaster, you have people who are waiting to exploit that. Whenever you have cancer, you have snake oil salesmen. And so seeing that a business is going to, use something as tragic as the Terrigen Cloud's effect on mutant kind to make a quick buck, and it turns out enslave the people who think they're going to cryosleep and turn them into super soldiers, like, I buy it. I like those real-world parallels in X-Men and in comics in general.
This issue, or rather the reveal at the end of it, does for me point to one of the major weaknesses of Cullen Bunn's run on Uncanny, which in general I think the writing's good. I do think it's a little bit impenetrable if you're not familiar with some, at this point, deepish dives into continuity. I feel like the Apocalypse stuff, if you don't know Angel's history in a fair degree of detail, a lot of that's going to fly over your head. And in this case, man, the guy who is revealed at the end to be trying to take over someday and behind some of the stuff going on is a brave choice. It's a very brave choice.
I never expected to see the Scarab again. Or no, the Locust? Locust? God damn it.
Obviously, that's not who it is.
No, I was thinking, who was that magma guy that never got brought in that Kurt Busiek was telling us about?
Oh, Metaxo the Lava Man.
Metaxo the Lava Man.
That would have been so great. Oh my god, I wish it had been Metaxo the Lava Man.
If I could go back in time and change one thing in all of history, I would replace this reveal with a reveal of Metaxo the Lava Man.
So, you want to just spoil... Can we spoil this? Or do we want to... Is anyone going to be... I feel like for most people, we'll say it and they'll just be like, who?
Okay, so we're going to spoil this. This is your notice to skip ahead to the next section if you don't want to know who shows up for one page.
Yeah.
Ready?
Spoilers now.
It's Exodus, everybody's favorite red-skinned guy with a mullet and an improbable metal thing on his back, and a history that's actually really, really complicated.
Yeah, he's been around for a very long time.
And he got...
like, centuries long.
Yeah, he's like 900 years old.
Something ridiculous like
that. When 900 years old you reach, look so red you will not.
I thought he was sort of gold at this point.
Skin
he was red for a while.
Well, regardless.
Yeah, he looked a lot like Gladiator.
Yeah, except not a mohawk.
No.
But regardless, yeah, I think that your point is a good one, which is that, if you're not familiar with a character who was big in the 90s and has only been seen occasionally since, then that last page is just going to elicit sort of a, from you.
Because obviously it's supposed to be a big deal. But look, I mean, we're us, and we had to look him back up to see where he last showed up.
Yeah, it turns out he was killed by that Matthew Malloy guy back in Bendis's run.
Oh, everyone was killed by Matthew Malloy.
Well, exactly. That timeline was overwritten, so I guess he's fine.
Yeah. Wasn't he working with S.H.I.E.L.D. at that point?
Something about S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't remember the specifics, but regardless.
Anyway, now he is taking over the Someday Corporation.
Now, that said, I don't think it's a bad thing to dive back into continuity to pull stuff out, and that's something that clearly this is the book that does that, of the current books we have on the line for the X-Men, and I'm okay with that. But it is certainly a limitation if a new reader is coming into this. They're not going to catch everything. Now, go ahead.
Well, and it dilutes the impact of what's obviously supposed to be a big, breathtaking reveal. Mm-hmm. Because you turn the page and it's Exodus, and if your first response is, Exa who?
Right. Exodus was actually one of the translations of the last boss of Final Fantasy V. Many American translations...
Oh, you mean X-Death?
Yes, instead settled on X-Death. He was a tree... It was weird. I don't fully understand what was going on there. Regardless. But yeah, this book, so Greg Land is still doing art, and I gotta say, like, what I said about his work last time, I think it still holds true. I think it's definitely improved. The photo referencing, if it's present, is much less noticeable. And while he's certainly not, his work is certainly not my go-to work for a book, I don't think it's distracting, and I think it lets Cullen Bunn tell his story.
I disagree, but I think that I have said my piece on that enough times that I don't need to go into it this time. I certainly agree that he has done worse work, but there's still a pretty wide window.
Well, regardless. For me, it's fine. Like, I'm okay with the art in this.
The colors are pretty.
They are, yes. They're actually, the colors and the inks, I think, are part of why the pencils look more consistent. I think they do a really good job.
Those are definitely carrying a lot of weight.
Mm-hmm. As far as the plot itself, or I should say the characterization, I like that we're seeing Psylocke as the narrator of this. Yeah. The betrayed Betsy Braddock realizing how much Magneto's been keeping from her. Because the fact is, Magneto's kind of too far gone to be a protagonist at this point.
I don't think there's anyone else on that team who could be a protagonist. I mean, what are our other options? Angel?
I mean, they're all kind of very damaged
Magneto?
people.
Phantom X? You can use Phantom X as a protagonist, but not on this book, not for this story. You can't. He is, if Phantom X is your protagonist, your story is written around Phantom X being the protagonist.
And it's interesting that this book comes out the same week as the last issue of Civil War II X-Men, because we see some similar Magneto stuff there, which I'll talk about when we get to it. But I like the way Magneto's being written. It's frustrating, but it's frustrating in a way that I believe.
Next up is All New Wolverine number 12, written by Tom Taylor, with pencils by Iguara, inks by Walden Wong, and colors by Michael Garland. So this wraps up the All New Wolverine Civil War tie-in, and it is, I think, the by far and away best of the Civil War II tie-ins that I have seen, including Civil War II itself. This resolves that story. It resolves the Logan and Gabby chunk of the story, or at least this arc of it. And it does it really well and really neatly, with an ending that I can only describe as Laura Kinney metaphorically closing her pull box.
Pretty much that. Yeah, what I like most about this, and while I will say I think I like the Ms. Marvel Civil War II tie-in slightly better, this is a very good one, but what I really like about this is that it ties into the larger plot, not just in there's this guy who has precognition and it's affecting law enforcement, but it nicely parallels it with stuff going on in the book. And for me, because, we have this character, Old Man Logan, who's seen the future, but it's not the right future. It's a good parallel to what Ulysses can do with his inhuman powers. And that, for me, almost makes this more of an Old Man Logan story than a Wolverine story, but I'm okay with that.
Well, Old Man Logan is more the catalyst for the story than Wolverine is, but the story is still firmly Wolverine's point of view and about her, and about her relationships to, respectively, Old Man Logan and Gabby, which are complicated and interesting parallels. There are some twists that I'm not going to spoil. An ending that I really, really love. The dialogue on the last page is, I think, both a very solid story ender and a pretty clear and pretty passionate statement about events like Civil War II in general. In ways that I really appreciated. And also some very good storytelling. Man, I feel bad because Guara is doing an awesome job.
I really like Guara's work.
Except that the standards for comparison are David's Navarro and Lopez and Marcio Takara, and that's not fair. No one should have to go up against any of those guys on this book.
What is up with this book having had such a phenomenal group of artists working on it?
Yeah, and it's still phenomenal. This is ridiculous. This is so good. This is the best X-Line book coming out by now.
Yeah, I really think it is.
By a fairly wide margin.
And we say this as people who love All New X-Men.
We do. We love it deeply. And we love that version of Laura, too. Basically, books with Wolverine in them. Books with proper Wolverine, with Laura Kinney Wolverine in them, are better than X books without her. I think we can say that fairly decisively now. Whether correlation in this case implies causation, I'm not even going to hazard a guess, but the facts, I think, speak for themselves.
I will say, so the last issue of All New Wolverine ended with a terrifying cliffhanger. This issue deals with that in an interesting way that I was very okay with.
Yeah, I am intrigued by the implications coming out of this. I am intrigued by how complex at least one character in this cast is turning out to be. I would have liked more Jonathan. If I have one complaint, it's the relative absence of Jonathan, the actual Wolverine, from this issue. Because he's very important to me. So
Hawkeye did that issue from Pizza Dog's perspective. Squirrel Girl's about to do an issue from
Tippy Toes?
No, from Mew's perspective. Nancy's cat. So clearly what we need is an issue of All New Wolverine from Jonathan the Wolverine's perspective.
Yes. Absolutely, and unquestioningly.
Okay, so Tom, if you're watching this, then you should write.
We're gonna tweet at you too,
yes.
Just in case, because this is important, man.
So next
do it for the children. Do it for the future.
Right. So the next storyline is Enemy of the State 2, and that's going to be interesting because that promises to be an incredibly dark story in a way this series really hasn't been yet.
It started real dark, Miles.
Well, not like Enemy of the State.
A lot of people died.
But a lot of people died in that one.
Yeah. But this is a different Wolverine. And it's a different Wolverine going through stories whose similarities and parallels to her predecessor's stories also serve to highlight their differences.
Yeah, and I'm also, I don't know, the idea of Enemy of the State, of, Wolverine getting brainwashed and doing terrible things, given Laura's past, given, her X-23 days, there's a lot of story to be mined there. So talking about bringing in backstory, I think that could work especially well. So I'm excited. But yeah, I'm glad this story went as well as it did. It was good. It was a big event tie-in that was good.
Yeah, and man, I will say again, if you haven't checked out the annual for this book yet, you should go back and do that. Really, you should just read all of this book. It's so good. It's so consistently so good.
And finally, we have Civil War II X-Men number 4 of 4, written by Cullen Bunn, with art by Andrea Braccardo and colors by Jesus Abertov. So this series, it worked out pretty well, I thought. I mean, it's very much a Civil War II series. It's very much like, here's the conflict, here's the X-Men's take on that conflict. But I really like the way Cullen Bunn handled it. I really like Braccardo's art and Abertov's colors. Like, it's good stuff. I wouldn't say that this is, an exceptional series that'll be remembered throughout the ages. But as tie-ins go, I felt perfectly happy reading it.
I felt less happy reading it. It was a perfectly adequate book. I thought the resolution was well handled, and I was and remained throughout entirely uninterested in its premise. That never grabbed me. It never felt significant, and it never really addressed the big Terrigen Cloud issue, which seems like it's what should be the big issue, that the Inhumans have this thing that's effectively a genocidal cloud that they're just refusing to deal with.
Well, I think I understand why the series would do that, because this one's about the conflict between what to do with Ulysses and his powers. Believe me, if you want to see the mutants and the Inhumans deal with the Terrigen Cloud, we have 3 miniseries coming up that's going to be exactly that. So they won't leave you hanging. There'll be plenty, possibly more than we want.
They won't leave us hanging, we say. How long after the noodle incident was initially teased?
I think it'll turn out that Death of X is going to be exactly what the winner of our Death of X, our noodle incident contest said.
Oh God, I dearly hope so. It's 3 books of Cyclops just exhaustedly going through photocopied manuals.
Charles Soule, call us. You can rewrite. It's not too late. But anyway,
it's probably too late.
Probably too late. So one weird little thing that I thought was strange is that this series is about Magneto's team of Uncanny X-Men and Storm's team of Extraordinary X-Men fighting over the whole, future police pre-crimes division conflict. And in Civil War itself,
no, they're fighting over whether the guy should be, whether Ulysses should be, dragged out and pilloried or whatever, which is weird because Destiny, these guys have all hung out with precognitives. That's a thing.
Yeah, but a few of them were used by all of the Avengers to arrest people preemptively.
Yeah, but Destiny was on Freedom Force.
It's true. Well, regardless,
this event, man.
Point being, it's kind of weird because we have those 2 teams in here, and then in Civil War itself, we have the all-new X-Men in the place of Magneto's team, which I thought was strange. Maybe they figured Magneto wouldn't actually team up with anybody. Regardless, I do like a lot of the character work in here, because there's the inevitable, members of each team pair off to fight each other thematically appropriately. But there's one scene where Storm and Archangel take each other out, and they're both falling from the sky about to go splat.
And Nightcrawler and Psylocke break up the fight they're having to catch their respective teammates.
Which is such an X-Men thing. And
it is.
Similarly,
it's one that they've done repeatedly.
And similarly, toward the end, when, the reconciliation takes place and Nightcrawler inevitably comes back to his team saying, hey, are we still buds? And Storm just basically hugs him and says, of course, we've been through worse. Of course, you're a member of this team. It rings really true. I think Bunn handled that X-Men feel about as well as could be done in a series like this.
Does it seem to you that Storm has shrunk over time? I've been noticing that here, and I've been noticing it at Extraordinary. She's supposed to be pretty tall.
Storm's supposed to be kind of physically imposing. She's not, burly, but she's tall
very
and striking.
Tall.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird that Nightcrawler is gigantic compared to her, because he was always one of the slighter.
Yeah, he's a full head taller than her, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah. That was kind of weird, it's true. I like the art overall, but that was a strange little bit. So anyway, if you are just going to follow Civil War from an X-Men perspective, this is a perfectly good way to do so. Not an essential series, but then again, I don't really think Civil War 2 itself is an essential series.
Yeah, I was going to say, or you could just not.
Yeah. So, regardless, I think the creative team did a really good job with what they had to work with. I just think that what they had to work with was...
Not very nice?
Not very nice. I was going to say, a little more gimmicky than substantive, but, that works too.
Okay, that is 5 of 5 books reviewed. Miles, what's our pick of the week?
I think our pick of the week has to be Extraordinary X-Men Annual #1. It has 2 stories, and both are really stellar in their own ways. I mean, we have a great, small-scale, intimately written heist. I mean, they even all set their watches to X-Haven time. That's the kind of ridiculousness that I really appreciate. And we have a truly lovely, very short, but perfectly written and drawn story about a combination of characters I never would have expected, but seem obvious in retrospect. So, well done, Extraordinary X-Men Annual #1, and everyone involved. What about our panel?
Our panel of the week is in fact also from that same annual, and it is from Forge We Have a Problem. It is this gorgeous splash page of Forge and Lunella and the Rocket. And first of all, it's just a great image. But second of all, it's a really well-constructed page. I want you to take a minute and look at the way it's framed. The debris and then the two of them. And now, a lot of people would have put Forge's word balloon over to the side so it didn't get in the way of the rocket rather than smacking it in the center of the page. There's a good reason it's there, because you can follow that lineup from the two of them to the word balloon saying, "This thing will never fly," up to the nose of the rocket and from there to the moon. And then smoothly on to the next page. But it's a great trajectory. It's a beautiful use of space. And it's a beautiful use of a kind of odd balloon placement to create really lovely sight lines and to emphasize them.
So that is all we have for this week.
There is one more thing I feel like we should mention. Actually, two more things. The first is a comic, the second's a convention. We haven't been able to pick our copy up yet, but the Bill Sienkiewicz New Mutants Artists Edition came out today. These are gorgeous, oversized books. We have the Thor one.
The Walter Simonson.
We have a copy of the Sienkiewicz one waiting for us at Books with Pictures that we're going to be picking up tomorrow or the next day. But if you are a fan of that stuff, if you're a fan of Sienkiewicz's art, I highly recommend tracking down a copy of this. It is really expensive. It's $150. That said, even if you just get a chance to page through it, it's worth a look. It's a great window into sort of how the sausage is made, how the comics are constructed, and some of the really beautiful and really inherently physical aspects of that process. And I am really fully planning to take our copy to bed with me and just hold it
That's reasonable.
every night for at least the next week.
And as far as conventions, we just got done with Rose City Comic Con, but we adventure onward because we're going to be at Vegas Valley Comic Book Festival in, well, I guess a little while, but
in November.
Yeah,
it's November 5th, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is. So Guy Fawkes Day. We will be celebrating the survival of Parliament in Vegas. We've got a live show with a really big surprise planned for the beginning.
I have no idea if this is going to go well, but it's going to be amazing.
I'd like to emphasize something we said around Emerald City, which is that Scott Koblish is the best sport of all time.
Yes, he is.
He really, really is. And it's an awesome show. It's a library show. It is 100% free. We'll have info for that on our website. We've been tweeting about it all day. Miles is also going to be at New York Comic Con.
I am. I'll be working with Dark Horse and thus highly distracted by the very busy Dark Horse booth. But if you have a chance to come say hi and are not offended by me possibly having to break off mid-conversation to do selling stuff, I would love that. I always love meeting listeners, whether I'm there as part of the podcast or there as part of Dark Horse, or they're just wandering around aimlessly not knowing how I got there in the first place. Regardless.
And the week after that, I am going to be lurking around at CXC. I'm not actually tabling anywhere, and I'm just going to be popping into a couple of the talks in the Artist's Alley at some point.
We're not home very much these days.
We're home at least monthly or so.
Yes.
We try.
Regardless.
Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men is recorded. This is not the actual outro.
That's okay. Keep going.
What am I saying? If you like what you've seen here, and think it would be way better without our faces, check out our podcast, which is also better edited than this video, at all. Although that was a good moment. That comes out, Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men comes out weekly on Sundays at explainthexmen.com, also on iTunes and Stitcher. What have we got for them this week, Miles?
So this week we have the first half of the New Mutants going back to Asgard. They were there for the Asgardian Wars way back in the day in 85 or so, and it was awesome. And now they're back, and it's not quite as awesome, but it is a lot of fun, and it does feature Hela, who has the best hat in the entire Marvel Universe, beating out even Galactus.
Well, and Boom Boom is there. Boom Boom was not in Asgard the first time, and everything is better with Boom Boom.
Pretty much. Also substantially more property damage whenever she's around, and as someone whose property that isn't, because it's in a comic book, I appreciate that.
That podcast, these video reviews, and everything at explainthexmen.com, including visual companions to every episode, recaps, reviews, and much, much more, are brought to you by our Patreon subscribers. We are an entirely listener-supported project. Those are the rad folks who make all of this possible, and let us keep doing it ad-free. If you want to join their ranks, you can do that via the link either above or below this video, depending on where you're watching it.
In the meantime, we will see you in about half a week for a podcast episode, about a week for another one of these, and possibly at one or more conventions scattered all over the rest of the year and all over very specific parts of the country. But if you're there, come say hi.
Really, though, we're always watching. I don't want to do a tag this week.
Well, we don't have to, I guess.